Joshua, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
You know, we first met at a Teach to Lead conference, and we were just saying off camera, 2017. So
Mhm.
time flies. I've loved watching you and following your journey. And the article was such a nice crowning piece for the spring issue
Thank you.
that can't thank you enough for sharing of yourself.
Yeah.
So I noticed, and it never really occurred to me because knowing you personally, it's not like when you know someone, you go back and check what their EDD study was on, but systems. When you think of kind of a systems approach, systems thinking, and servant leadership, what does that intersection look like for you, where you have the two passions?
Yeah, it was, doing the doctoral was a journey in itself, just identifying what I wanted to research on.
Yeah.
My master's thesis was on the connection between the need of social emotional learning within a STEM environment, given
Oh,
our big push within the STEM fields and how some of our students aren't fully equipped on the social norms or expectations or skills to be able to be successful in the sense of community based, right?
right.
As you know, the director of robotics, I do have a couple of kids who, from freshman year to now seniors, they've grown tremendously in their social and emotional skill sets, but very, very strong in those STEM based. So that's where I initially started, but then I wanted to take it a step further. And so that's where the leadership came into place.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I was like, there's something more. There needs to be something more. I kept asking myself. And that's where I just kept reflecting and thinking, okay, teacher focus is important, but there's
Mhm.
something more. And then it was like, well, teachers learn from leaders. Okay, there's something more. Where do the leaders learn other than either their courses, their professional development, or even in their small groups?
Right.
And how effective are those for the leaders? Because every leader interprets leadership differently, every leader views leadership differently. And so when I then officially decided to focus my research in uh, integrating a hospital-based model of dyadic modeling into a
Huh.
K-12 environment,
Wow.
the biggest factor was how do we collaborate and how do we focus and train our leaders to help the community as a whole.
That's
Uh,
fascinating.
yeah.
What did you take away from that more specifically? For those of us who aren't familiar with the model, what what are you able to see and understand and apply from that?
Yeah, so the dyadic model really focuses, it takes away like a hierarchical approach and
Hmm.
partners at least in the hospital realm, it would partner a medical professional with let's say, an operational professional. And together they
Oh,
collaborate on building the skills necessary to make their department a success. So that is where there was an increase of trust, of buy-in, of collaboration, of communication, because now you have two leaders who understand both operational and systems of what a medical office would look like. Um, so then what I took it as a step further in saying, okay, how can we actually increase collaboration amongst teachers with the leader, with the
right.
administrator,
Yeah.
or even taking it a step further with principals to superintendents, right?
Right.
Because sometimes it's very much a trickle down effect.
Yeah.
And what was found, and it was a very small scale study because I did it in-house at my
Yeah.
school site.
Yeah.
But when it came with the teachers that I collaborated with the most, saw a higher percentage in trust, saw a higher percentage in collaboration and vulnerability, where teachers were like, "Hey, these are my struggles, and therefore let me share them with you, and let's work together to move forward." Um, which then has those trickle downs with student engagement, student success.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating because certainly, and it's nice to take a step back and think of a hospital approach, a hospital setting, and realize in what you're describing, there's certainly the systems pieces that the medical staff and the operational staff bring to that relationship. But then there's also this sense of very being personally involved and invested in that, that
Mhm.
when you get into servant leadership, you talk so wonderfully. There's a simplicity to how you describe it, but there's also a kind of a poetic flourish to it that it becomes innately personal. It's
Yes.
not just a business relationship. It's not just 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. when the buses leave. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and that was one of the touching points I also made, was that, when our education system was taking off, it was more based off of what was happening globally at the time, right? So we were in a very manufacturing based industrialization approach. So teaching was not very personable in the sense.
right.
And then we're seeing the globalization of technology, right, at a much higher rate. But we're still taking this manufacturing approach in academics, in teaching, and in even in relationships, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
bringing in that medical field where it's super personable, it's super relational because you're building those relationships with your doctor. You're trusting that who you're going with, you are going to come out okay, right?
right, right.
We would want our students to feel the same way, and that's a challenge in itself because, as sometimes education is seen as a business model, and
Yeah,
if there's no outcomes or outputs, then we're not going to be investing as much. And it's
yep,
like it's more than that. And
of
so
course.
that's one of the things I highlight as well.
It's a beautiful point, and I'll ask, not that I expect that you have an answer. I certainly don't. Well, how do we get past this? We still have these vestiges of the industrial age in
Mhm.
education, and we're certainly in a time of disruption where it's possible to shed some things and reinvent some things. Um, do you see a path forward in being able to make the relationship the core, the focus, and the key to the outcomes in education, and get away from this kind of business like we have metrics, we have outcomes, and we fund where we see data
Mhm.
justifying investment.
Yeah, I definitely will always see that there is going to be an outcome in terms of investments within our relational parts.
Hmm.
I think there's still that importance of the data metrics when it
Hmm.
comes to the academic realm of education, just so that we know where we are at in terms of performance or how
Hmm.
students are learning, right? Because we can try all these different strategies, but it's the data behind it that shows us whether the students are absorbing what we're trying to do,
Right.
and getting the outcomes we're looking for. But I
Hmm.
also feel that we are definitely highlighting post-COVID the need for the mental health, right?
Yep.
Um, Depending on the direction of government viewship or state viewship or even local community viewship, the idea is it's there and is booming. Is that we identify the need that our students are struggling. Our students are reliant heavily on technology.
Yep.
Um, it's an addiction.
Yeah.
And what better way to start focusing on and highlighting the need for mental health, but taking a stretch forward of how do our relationships impact mental health for our students?
That's so spot on. Um, well, you start the article talking about where you began at a middle school in South Central Los Angeles, which
Yes.
is a tough place to start. I mean, that's you're hitting the ground in Realityville. Um, and you talk about it in the article, but share with us live that experience and how those leaders helped you to get some really strong roots and then begin your journey successfully.
Yeah, so I worked at Animal Jefferson Middle School
Uh,
as my first placement right out of college.
Okay.
And it was in South LA where I was a native of Long Beach. And so I wasn't really familiar with the community-based environment because so a little backstory is I come from a single mother of five who worked very hard to get us out of areas where they were not as safe as other communities. And so you always just hear, right? You watch videos, you see movies where South Central has this very umbrella-like reputation. And so I was just like, well, at the end of the day, it's if this is where I'm to serve, this is where I will be. And it was the most impactful part of my teaching career that actually shaped everything
Yeah.
because the administration, who I'm still friends with, took it very, very serious that their staff is important to them.
Yeah.
Like I remember I had a principal that was like, if you are stressed, if you're overwhelmed, you take a day. You take care of yourself, because our kids will not benefit if you're breaking down. And so there was always that frequent check-ins and support systems that when I would do these, when I would go to school after work, because we did an intern credentialing program, my peers would always like, "Oh my God, my first year is horrible. I'm still learning the systems, learning the students, learning the community." And I would come in like, "Oh, I'm having a great time." Like my kids are great. Say what you want to say about South Central, but my kids are great because they also bought into the environment. They felt the love, right?
Yeah.
They felt the appreciation because, again, it was a trickle effect. Admin cared for their staff, the staff cared for the kids, and it was such a harmony of relationships.
And it's such a salient point today where we're reading the studies coming out that the proclivity for teacher burnout and leaving
Mhm.
the profession is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
Um, when you think about that and think about the case you make for servant leadership, how do you see that playing out moving forward? How can servant leadership address what's happening in education?
Yeah, so I would argue that or make the statement that servant leadership, I wouldn't say it's going to be the full solution, but I would definitely
Right.
say it would be some of the solution. And
Mhm.
a part of that is that administrators need support just as their teachers, right?
Of
It's
course.
kind of like that who counsels the counselor, right? Or the therapist.
Right. Right.
And the thing about servant leadership, what it really encompasses and it focuses is the empathy and the listening, the commitment to growth, right? The focus of building the community, of putting others first. And so that when an administrator feels that, whether it's administrator to administrator or head of school, superintendent to their admin, right?
Right.
It just becomes a common behavior where it's like, I am also shining this onto my staff.
Right.
And that's what teachers really are looking for. They're looking for leaders that actually genuinely listen, right? We go to trainings where it's like active listening is important, but but actually active listening, right? Not just making the time and
Right.
having a teacher, kind of vent a little, and then you're just like, uh-huh, because you're focusing on a thousand other
Right.
things.
Right.
Um, so just like those little bits that could really have a larger impact for teachers to say, hey, yes, my kids may not be the best, or yes, my community may not be the best, but my administrators care for me. My administrators value me as a person. My administrators are willing to go above and beyond to help me in my times of need. So then they feel closer to the school, given other factors not feeling the same way.
Well said. And for me, sitting at the far end of the career spectrum, I can honestly say, and maybe it's just an opinion, but when I work with educators in their 40s and their 30s, the next generation has a real radar for picking up authenticity.
Mhm.
They can tell it coming a mile away. If you're just going through the motions, or if your mind is five other places and your priority really isn't them, they shut down really quick. They
Mhm.
just turn you off. There's not a lot of
Yeah.
you don't get a lot of chances. Um, Trying to remember when COVID hit and everything changed in 2020, were you still in the classroom or were you in an administrative position at that point?
I was still in the classroom. I was teaching middle school science and math, but I
Okay.
was in a department position where I oversaw the middle school at my school
Yep.
site.
Yep.
And I also supported in just the managerial side of COVID
Yeah.
for our school site.
It struck me at the time, and I was still with ASCD at the time. We wound up having a lot of cohorts meeting online,
Hmm.
assistant principals, building principals, district leaders. There was this immediate sense of loneliness and isolation in leadership that trying to be there for your staff, for your kids, for your community, and try to take care of yourself while
Mhm.
all the rules were changing, while the ground was shifting under your feet, and while nobody really knew what it was going to look like in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
because you're trying to meet everyone's needs. Um, how did that look to you at the time? Did this help solidify your resolve that you wanted to get into leadership because you saw everything in play? Or did you kind of step back and go, whoa, this is a real twist
Mhm.
in everything I thought leadership looked like?
Yeah, so I would say that it was during my Animal Jefferson time where I knew right away it was like I need to, my drive for leadership was there right after
Okay.
the first year,
Okay.
because I was very inspired by my administration. So then the schools that I worked after Animal Jefferson, I pursued some form of position. So like whether it was STEM coordinator, grade level leader, um, or even mentor teachers through, peer-to-peer credentialing program or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, but as when I was at the school, when COVID hit, I was only about maybe a year into that school site because I had relocated from Long Beach to Escondido. I think one of the saving grace was that my coworker was also my roommate.
Ah,
So had I been all alone, it would have been much more struggling.
yeah.
Also because a lot of my family, they just worked from home. I was really
Mm.
the only person who had to go in person for work. And
Wow.
so that limited myself from going to see my family in Long Beach because I was frequently exposed.
Yeah.
I just remember a lot of my coworkers just talking, creating Zoom calls, just that
Yeah.
community of support. And that is what really got me through the COVID years. Because as we all know, leadership could be a very, very lonely task.
Incredibly. And it seems to me that the last 5 years, even after we got out from social distancing and masking and remote learning as a big push, we really haven't recovered. Anyone I talk to in a classroom or in a school building
Mhm.
is wearing so many hats
No.
and feeling such stress. And of course, resources are dwindling. So there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And so when you speak so passionately about the intentionality of the leaders at AJMS and how, you said very forthrightly, I had some other experiences with leaders that weren't as great. I've seen what I want to do and what I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Um, but when you talk about intentionality to your audience today, and they are wearing five hats, and they don't know what September looks like in terms
Yeah.
of where things are going. Um, how do you practice that kind of mindful, deliberate intentionality when everything is racing either at you or around you,
Mhm.
and focusing and staying mindful can be a real challenge?
Yeah. So it's gonna sound a little weird because I went to a workshop
Mhm.
where the first words that came out from the presenter was, "If you have an open door policy, you have to throw it out the door." And I
Wow.
was like, what does that mean? Like I want to be the leader that anyone can come to.
Yeah.
And his response was the open door policy actually does more damage to the learning community than having a closed door policy because when people are being intentional with their time, you're actually
Yeah.
giving them 100% of your focus, right? So
Okay.
if you're blocking 30 minutes for a teacher meet, those 30 minutes are hyper focused for that teacher. So then that activates the act of learning, the act of listening. Um, so that was one key takeaway that I constantly share with admin to help build this intentional of, okay, what do I have to do, right? Because not everything's going to work out perfect. But being mindful of, I have a team to lead, I have a calendar on hand. How can I merge them both to be as successful for my team and supportive? And so, what I've done as an admin, and I'm very vocal about it, is that there are times where they're blocked out just strictly for teacher support,
Hmm.
right? Unless, there's a fire drill or something's going on, that time is allocated for the staff. And that helps me to stay a little grounded and intentional with them. But I also block myself for like a weekend, like reading a book. One book is for just, pleasure, and the other book is for learning. And what I feel is has impacted my ability to grow as a leader is just my wanting to learn more, my growth mindset. And I think
Yeah.
that's also what's big on the intentional part is if a leader is willing to take on what others have done or take in advice or take in some feedback or willing to continue to learn more, that's where you kind of start moving your puzzle pieces and finding some form of effective matrix in the leadership realm.
It's so true. And another way that you kind of stretch yourself is, and you said this very pointedly in the article, asking, how can I help?
Mhm.
Because as soon as, I mean, it's a wonderful gesture. It sets a tone. It reinforces everything you're talking about and how staff need to feel cared for. But as the leader, you know, as soon as you utter those four words, you don't know what's coming.
No.
And you have to have a sense of self-efficacy that whatever it is, we'll figure it out. I
Mhm.
may not have the answer right away. I may even struggle a little with this in front of my staff, but that's another way of growth.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
And I would like to add on to that is that obviously, in larger schools, it gets a little more challenging,
of
right?
course,
But if the intention is to make some time out of the week to at least meet for 3 minutes with
right,
each staff, right?
right,
You start picking up on their patterns. You start noticing their behaviors, right? And this is where that empathy, the listening, the understanding staff comes into play through servant leadership is that you start noticing, okay, this person looks stressed, right? Last week they shared that they were maybe having going through some family stuff. Maybe that has something to do with it. So then you're already coming with a position of it might be school related or it might be family personal related.
yeah,
But you don't build that unless you're investing that time to understand or get to know staff.
it's so true. You build that context. It's so true. You make a point towards the end of the article, and to me, it kind of it paints the big picture because so much of what you talk about is personal and interpersonal. But servant leaders share common goals, working with the team to incorporate milestones, identify areas of growth, and work towards that work-life balance. So, in that, I interpret that as that's the culture. That's what
Mhm.
you're building that's pervasive across grade levels and personalities and everything else going on in the community, that everyone on staff has buy-in because you've shared what the
Mhm.
plan is and
Yeah.
and you've asked them to help and certainly help them to troubleshoot when they feel like they're stuck or they don't understand or
Mhm.
they're not sure how to help. Um, that is not a short-term project.
No.
In your experience, how far do you get in, say, 3 years, 5 years, and how do you look at this as a long-term investment?
Yeah, so in my systems thinking brain, and
Yeah.
this is kind of like what I did in my new role as academic dean,
Yeah.
was last year I was vice principal plus partially academic dean.
Mm.
So what I did was I made it a goal of mine to meet with almost every teacher and ask what's working, what's not working.
Yeah.
And then I start building a profile, right? Whether it's an academic curriculum, whether it's resources or strategies or teaching methods, classroom management, things like that. Like I want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right.
And some of them were in groups, like in grade level groups. Others were one-on-one. And then I just started building. So that was my first kind of my first step.
Yeah.
Once I find I have an understanding of that, of the needs, or I start reflecting on what does our systems offer,
Yes.
what works and what doesn't work, or what don't we have,
Right.
and then I start working with the administrators. What do we need in terms of if we have four core problems within our staff, what
Yep.
systems are tackling these problems, and if we don't, let's figure this out, because the goal is we're looking for longevity,
Right.
and then once that's been identified, then comes the implementation, right? And those can get tricky because
Yes.
You could be super passionate like me one time, and I will admit my fault where I took too many projects on because it's like I want to help it all.
Right.
But then I was like, I can't help all, right?
Right.
Uh, but the framework, the system started building there. The building blocks were there. And then by the third year, you start seeing just that systemic rhythm. And hopefully by fourth and fifth year, it just comes naturally, right? So, for example, we started a different observation approach, right? We're
Mhm.
going into our third year. Now, everyone, there's common language. There's common language around the Danielson framework. There's common language of what an informal observation versus a formal observation. There's
Yes.
common language between classroom learning environment and academic discourse. Like
Yes.
that's the goal, right? You're building so that it then becomes second nature.
It's wonderful. And how do you see this playing out with students in the community? How are the parents noticing? Do you get feedback from the community stakeholders that they like the direction things are going? How do you get that kind of input?
Yeah, so the elementary admin at Rancho and I we met, and that was one of her big goals is integrating and speaking to our community. So we,
Yeah.
like educators, we have all these, acronyms. We came up with
Yeah.
C3, which is curriculum, coffee, and conversations.
Ooh,
And we
nice.
are very, very strategic in have hosting those on campus, and that's where
Hmm.
we get output from parents like, how are you feeling about the current piloting of the curriculum? Or we
Right.
showcase what curriculums we're going to be piloting and the direction the school is going. We haven't had strong turnouts, like we average about 20 parents, which is great, but we're also trying to find that sweet spot of time.
Right.
But those 20 parents have already shared with other parents, like, hey, you need to start coming to these, right?
Yeah.
They're giving us an open platform. They're allowing us to express our successes, our love of the school, and also our frustration of the school. And guess what? They're actually doing something to tackle these things.
Yes.
So that's where that's been a very positive thing this year.
It's just in every part of this conversation, you have feedback loops built in. And even when you walked in the door, your description is you're finding out, you're getting input. You're not walking in with an idea and telling people the way it's going to be. You're walking in and asking for lots of feedback, lots of right up front information to help inform what you're going to do. It's a great model. And I can't tell you how proud I am to know you, to see the work you're doing. The article just kind of capped it all off. And so what we'll do is we'll get this recording done and get it out to educators everywhere. And I put it right on the front cover of your article. So when people read the article, they can go right and click and then have the interview.
Thank
So
you.
it, all right there. So looking forward to hearing great things from you ahead.
Yes.
Let's continue to stay in touch.
Thank you very much.